Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining us today, because we are unpacking a narrative that is equal parts fascinating and literally terrifying. We're looking at a case study of a really peculiar localized anomaly, something that completely redefined the very concept of human expression for an entire community. Okay, let's dive into this. We are venturing into the chilling mystery of Gray Hollow. This was once your perfectly normal, quiet town with one very distinct, very alarming problem. Suddenly, nobody in the town smiled anymore. And as you'll see as we go through this wasn't just a collective bad mood or something was actively taking their joy away, literally, one face at a time.
Everything traces back to a single inciting incident, starting with a young boy named Ion. Just picture the scene for a second. It's a totally normal evening, and Ion is sitting silently at the dinner table. His mom is doing what literally any parent would do, right? She's trying to cheer him up, making goofy jokes, just trying to elicit a little grin. But Ion was physically unable to do it. No matter how hard she tried, his face remained entirely flat. Instead of laughing, he just whispered, "Someone took it, my smile." Now at first, as you might expect, everyone just completely dismissed this. It was written off as nothing more than a child's overactive imagination. But as the events in Gray Hollow soon proved, Ion was absolutely not making this up.
So that brings us to Section 1, a town drowning in fear. The epidemic spreads. Because Ion's condition was just the very beginning. What started as an isolated incident at a family dinner table rapidly began to spread, and this quiet town quickly found itself drowning in absolute panic as more and more people inexplicably lost their smiles. And this brilliantly illustrates the true horror of what was going on. Notice the stark contrast here. On one side, we've got what we traditionally associate with the lack of smiling, right? Emotional loss, sadness, depression, just the heavy weight of a bad day. That's a psychological state. But look at the other side. What was happening in this town was a physical loss. It was as if the actual mechanical ability to form a smile had been completely erased from their faces. It was an anatomical impossibility. And it left medical doctors completely confused. They weren't treating a sudden wave of localized sadness. They were dealing with the total physical vanishing of a basic human reflex.
To really wrap our heads around the speed of this escalation, let's trace the timeline. It all starts that one evening when Ion loses his smile. Then, just days later, that isolated event explodes into a town-wide crisis. Doctors are totally baffled as the physical loss of smiling sweeps through the population, and naturally, this rapid, unexplained panic led to rumors. Those whispers all started pointing toward one specific location at the edge of town, an abandoned photography studio that the locals had started calling the Smile Collector. Which brings us to the pivotal moment on our timeline. A skeptical teenager named Horace decides to actually enter that studio one night, which leads to the grim discovery the very next morning, where he's found outside, completely unable to smile.
Moving right along to Section 2, the abandoned photography studio. Horace seeks the truth.
To understand exactly what went down inside that building, we really need to focus on Horace. Horace was a total skeptic. He didn't buy into the town's ghost stories, and he decided to visit the studio that night for one specific reason, to prove the terrified rumors of Gray Hollow completely false. But stepping through those doors, he wasn't met with an empty room. He walked into a cold, dusty darkness, and as his eyes adjusted, he saw them. Hundreds of black and white photos covering the space. But it's the specific nature of these photos that is so crucial to this case. The subjects in every single photograph had these wide, completely unnatural smiling faces. Yet, in stark contrast to those forced grins, their eyes were filled with absolute pure terror. Think about that visual paradox for a second. Joy on the mouth, horror in the eyes, just plastered all over the walls of this freezing, abandoned room.
Which leads us to the ultimate question: what was waiting in the dark? Because just as Harris was taking in this horrifying gallery of terrified, smiling faces, the heavy studio door suddenly slammed shut behind him. No way out. He was entirely trapped inside the pitch black, completely sealed in with whatever had been collecting these photographs. And then, out of the darkness, came a soft, whispering voice. "Such a beautiful smile. I've been waiting for you." It's an incredibly cinematic, terrifying moment. Harris is trapped, surrounded by the photographic evidence of this epidemic, and this soft voice just casually, almost admiringly, addresses him from the shadows.
Let's move to Section 3 and see how this builds. The Smile Collector emerges, face to face with the entity.
So, the Smile Collector wasn't just a shadow, it was a tall, unnervingly thin figure. But the most horrifying detail here is its face. It possessed a pale face that was stretched into this grotesque grin. And as Horace looked closer, he realized exactly why the grin was so grotesque. It was actually made out of different, stitched-together smiles. To top off this nightmare, the entity had entirely hollow eyes. It's literally a physical manifestation of stolen human expressions, wearing the town's missing joy right on its pale face. So the crucial point is understanding the why. Why this specific human expression, right? The entity didn't just attack Horace right away. It stared deep into his soul with those hollow eyes and whispered its motive. Smiles carry joy and life, and it collects them. That was the secret. It wasn't feeding on flesh or blood or anything like that. It was an entity that sustained itself by harvesting the very essence of human happiness and vitality, permanently hoarding it in that dusty studio.
Which takes us to Section 4, the unending curse, the fate of Horace.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the aftermath. In the dark, Horace was completely helpless. The creature, wearing its stitched-together grin, finally reached out toward him. Overcome with pure terror, Horace couldn't even manage to scream as the entity claimed his smile, adding it to its horrific collection. But Horace didn't die in that studio. He was actually found alive outside the building the very next morning. But, just like Ion, and just like the rest of the town, Horace was physically unable to ever smile again. His joy had literally been amputated. But the absolute most terrifying piece of evidence is what was left behind. Inside that cold, dusty darkness of the studio, a brand new photograph mysteriously appeared on the wall. And that photograph showed Horace standing perfectly still, bearing a wide, completely unnatural grin, while his eyes stared out, filled with pure, undiluted terror.
Which brings us to the lingering reality of this explainer. The reports say that this abandoned photography studio, it still stands at the edge of Grey Hollow to this very day. It is still there, holding its gallery of stolen joy in the dark. So I'm going to leave you with this question to ponder. If you ever find yourself wandering near the edge of that town and you decide to take a photo near that dusty old building, will you make sure you're still able to smile afterward? Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this incredible and frankly terrifying case. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.